The war rages on with brutal intensity in the heart of Europe. On one side, Ukraine ramps up precision drone attacks. On the other, Russia steps up deadly bombings on civilian and energy infrastructure. Every blast adds to the toll of over 1 million soldiers lost in the war. The first moves highlight direct clashes and strikes on infrastructure in Russian and Ukrainian territories. Tactics include drones, missiles, and heavy artillery. Speaking of missiles, in the first chapter, I'll talk about the North Korean tactical nuclear missile just used. Yes, you heard that right, a tactical nuclear missile. Next, the focus shifts to attempts at a truce. With this extremely dangerous escalation, diplomatic moves gain ground with Trump at the center of negotiations, while Putin swings between resistance and openness. So far, Putin has only used talks to stall Trump, and it's working. But now Trump seems willing to escalate the war. The third part revolves around NATO and its nuclear alerts. NATO's presence amplifies the global risk as leaders in Poland and Belarus weigh the cost of direct involvement in the conflict, especially with atomic weapons in play. In the next chapter, the focus turns to the Middle East. Israel intensifies operations to seize all of Gaza, while Iran works to stop them and prepares for possible reactions from its rivals. Tensions rise as Israel advances into Palestinian territory and threats pour in from Tehran. The penultimate section covers China and its allies in the so-called New World Order. Taiwan, North Korea, and Asian alliances raise tensions and set the stage for what many call a pre-World War or one already underway. The Pacific is becoming increasingly militarized. Finally, the last chapter dives into Brazil, now making global headlines in its internal war to bring down the Supreme Court. US pressure, economic tariffs, and political threats pit the judiciary and federal government against the world's biggest power. And yes, even Moraes' wife is set to be punished by Trump's administration. Thus, each chapter reveals a conflict axis that, even from afar, is connected through strategic decisions by global leaders. The following paragraphs show just how close the world is to an irreversible breaking point. The pieces of this puzzle fit together with sinister precision. Energy, territory, alliances, and propaganda intersect as the people pay the price. Yes, you heard me. Part of that bill will land on your lap. So tell me if we're in a pre-World War or already in the third, just waiting for an apocalyptic strike to happen. And tell me if you think the US should interfere in a weaker country's politics like it's doing with Brazil. Should the judiciary fall? The debate is urgent, and all opinions deserve respect and seriousness. Just a reminder, this report is based on news from Sky News, The New York Times, BBC, The Guardian, Al Jazeera, Sputnik, RT News, and Telegram. But before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your subscription means a lot and helps you stay updated on every story about the raging nations. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up to help this project grow even more. Ukraine hit Russia's Afipsky refinery with drones, sparking fires and significant damage. Along with Krasnodar's refinery, it processes millions of tons of oil annually, making it a strategic target in the energy war. At the same time, North Korea launched its KN-23 ballistic missile, still carrying a conventional warhead but designed to hold tactical nuclear warheads. The test is a warning about the potential use of atomic payloads in the near future. According to Ukraine's Air Force, Russia fired over 6,000 Iranian-made Shahed kamikaze drones last month, assembled with Indian parts. They also used Kinzhal hypersonic missiles, 6 Iskander KN-23, and 4 cruise missiles against strategic targets. The Kinzhal can travel up to 2,000 kilometers at hypersonic speed, carrying warheads of nearly half a ton. Even without confirmed nuclear use, the presence of this weapon in the conflict raises the global threat level. In Nikopol, a Ukrainian emergency service vehicle was hit by Russian artillery, killing 3 people, including a rescuer, and injuring 4 others. Another strike on civilian targets that Kyiv calls an international crime. The Orlovka gas pipeline, vital for supply in southern Ukraine, was hit by Russian drones. Gas flow continued temporarily, but technicians warned that further attacks could completely shut the structure down. Zelensky confirmed that a gas facility in Odessa was destroyed. Ukraine's reserves are at their lowest in 12 years, at less than 1/3 capacity. Moscow seems to be using winter as a strategic weapon. Experts warn that destroying energy infrastructure aims to weaken Ukraine's resistance and pressure the population. By cutting basic resources, Russia causes wear without long, costly battles. The conflict is no longer limited to the battlefield. Energy, supply, and logistics have become weapons. The silent war on infrastructure is as devastating as direct assaults. The picture is clear. Increasingly powerful weapons, allies on the move, and the nuclear threat looming. One wrong step could trigger irreversible escalation. Putin is considering meeting Trump in the UAE but refuses to see Zelensky, citing a lack of appropriate conditions for direct dialogue. The move keeps pressure on the front and signals Moscow prefers to buy time while expanding strikes on energy and logistics targets. Trump says he doesn't need Russian approval to meet Putin. The White House is already working on security details and the schedule, while European allies push for an immediate truce. The risk is diplomacy turning into a stage play, with missiles and drones deciding the battlefield map. Macron reaffirms France's support for a monitored ceasefire and negotiations with guarantees. After speaking with Zelensky, he proposes a framework to halt advances and protect civilians without rewarding occupations. Paris seeks EU backing for an economic aid package. Ursula von der Leyen keeps direct contact with Zelensky to coordinate financial and military aid. Brussels wants to fast-track ammunition, air defense, and budget support, safeguarding essential services. The goal? Prevent Ukraine's internal collapse under gas and railway attacks. Lavrov speaks by phone with Hakan Fidan, seeking Turkey as a useful channel to free prisoners and manage grain routes. Ankara plays arbiter, selling influence in the Black Sea while monitoring drones over the Bosporus and the risk of friction with Russia. 2 days before Trump's deadline, his envoy Steve Witkoff spends 3 hours at the Kremlin. Washington threatens secondary sanctions and tariffs, even on China. Moscow tests boundaries and asks for concrete signals on territory, security, and Ukraine's NATO path. Marco Rubio says the US now better understands the Kremlin's red lines, the status of occupied areas, military neutrality, and gradual easing of sanctions. Kyiv fears territory becoming a bargaining chip, eroding commitments on sovereignty and withdrawal. Yuri Ushakov calls the talks useful and constructive, with direct message exchanges between Trump and Putin. The tone suggests a bargaining window, but no ceasefire. Moscow wants written guarantees, Washington demands verification. Kyiv insists on a withdrawal timeline. Zelensky reports Trump supports Ukraine's territorial integrity, but warns of textual traps. Kyiv demands verification clauses, damage reparations, and infrastructure safeguards, fearing Russia will use pauses to rearm and return stronger. At the White House, a Trump-Putin meeting is being considered for next week. Meanwhile, economic pressure builds with sectoral sanctions and tighter monitoring of Russian oil buyers. The message: without real progress, Moscow's financial cost will rise month by month. A NATO member issues a nuclear alert after Russian military moves in the Baltic and Arctic. Missile tests and redeployment of delivery systems raise readiness levels. European capitals boost air defenses and simulate responses to hybrid and cyber attacks. Analysts in Washington see the redeployment of warheads and bomber rotations as a deterrence signal. Moscow aims to freeze NATO decisions, making every move costly. The strategy is to keep allies split between caution and muscular response. A British colonel stirs debate by saying, "We can hit before they blink," citing a doctrine that shortens decision cycles. The remark, echoed in media, pushes for readiness and exposes the risk of human error when minutes separate radar detection from launch. At the center of the controversy is Asgard, the UK system using AI to fuse satellite, radar, and SIGINT data. The promise? Predict patterns and authorize strikes sooner. Critics warn automation could amplify noise and trigger lethal mistakes in chain reaction. European and Asian sites debunk rumors about NATO officers captured in Ukraine. With no photos, names, or coordinates, the story collapses. The information war rages on. Deepfakes, bot accounts, and anonymous channels try to sway opinion and erode trust. Donald Tusk sees a chance to freeze the conflict, holding current lines under international verification. The idea cuts human and economic costs, but faces rejection. Freezing means accepting the status quo and turning trenches into long-term borders. In the EU, support grows for freezing the conflict to avoid nuclear risks and curb defense inflation. Kyiv resists, fearing it will legitimize occupations and live under pause-dependent threats. The debate is between imperfect peace and slow defeat risk. Lukashenko says Moscow hasn't asked Belarus to join the fight, fearing a direct NATO response. Still, Minsk boosts mobilization and integrates radar and logistics with Russia, keeping deterrence high and strategic ambiguity intact. We prepare for battle precisely so we don't have to fight, Lukashenko says. Showing readiness would deter border adventurism. Belarus's doctrine bets on visible mobilization, alert air defenses, and strict border engagement rules. The Belarusian leader admits coordination with Moscow alarms the West. It's dangerous for them, and they know it. Minsk seeks security and energy benefits without crossing the line into total sanctions. One wrong move could be costly. The Security Cabinet of Israel approves fully occupying Gaza City, dismantling the Gaza extremist group, and transferring control to a neutral Arab administration. The goal includes freeing 22 hostages and neutralizing tunnels, arsenals, and command centers. The Israel Defense Forces say they control nearly all urban territory and expand block-by-block sweeps. Tactical demolitions target depots and launchers. The siege pressures group leaders but increases civilian damage and fuels criticism from allied capitals. Netanyahu says he doesn't want to govern Gaza, only to free it. Veteran generals warn that occupying ruins won't end the insurgency. In urban warfare, every alley can be an ambush, and a tactical win without a political exit only prolongs attrition and casualties. The UN calls an emergency meeting amid humanitarian collapse. Aid convoys face checkpoints and crossfire. Agencies warn of mass malnutrition risk. Diplomacy seeks technical pauses for evacuation and the entry of medicine and water. Tel Aviv insists on handing the city to an Arab civil council excluding Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. No country volunteers. Political cost and retaliation threats stall the plan. Without a guardian, the transition is a promise evaporating in the heat of battle. Germany suspends arms shipments, breaking a sensitive tradition since the Soviet Union. Berlin demands operational limits and civilian safeguards. The move exposes Western cracks and pressures suppliers to tie parts and ammo to commitments. Domestically, political fatigue grows. Youth and parts of the diaspora accuse the government of eroding democratic values. Protests demand clear goals, conduct audits, and an exit strategy. The victory debate becomes a duel between security and proportionality. On the Iranian side, after 12 days of fighting, Tehran reinstates Ali Larijani to a key position. The message: a pause is not surrender. The Revolutionary Guard says missile and drone units are ready, while allied networks adjust routes and stockpiles in the Levant. A Guard commander says the clash is only on pause and that new waves may target Israeli logistics and maritime assets. The tone adds to proxy militia attacks, keeping Israel under multiple threats and the northern border on edge. Gaza becomes the seismic epicenter of the Middle East. Every advance in demolished streets reopens diplomatic fronts and regional risks. If Hezbollah or Iranian units cross the threshold, the spiral could pull in Syria, Iraq, and Gulf ports, with an unpredictable domino effect. In Asia, Putin and Xi Jinping talk and reaffirm ties. Beijing says it supports a diplomatic solution in Ukraine but backs Moscow with technology and trade. The message is bloc unity, energy coordination, alternative routes, and aligned narratives in international forums. US companies build replicas of Chinese surface-to-air missile systems to train tactics and countermeasures. The simulation accelerates doctrine and exposes defense gaps. In the Pacific, bases test alerts, dispersal, and command and control redundancy. Beijing welcomes the Washington-Moscow rapprochement as a chance to buy time. While watching Trump and Putin, it consolidates critical supply chains, expands shipyards, and speeds dual-use production. China's strategic patience is using pauses to grow stronger. Trade disputes hit Chinese aviation. Tariffs and uncertainty depress demand for jet fuel and international routes. Airlines adjust networks, airports freeze expansion, and suppliers revise plans. The trade shock already weighs on the energy balance. Before the summit with Washington, Xi and Putin aligned their reading of the Ukrainian front. Beijing echoes that it cannot afford to see Moscow defeated. It's a signal of political support while weighing sanctions risks and calculating gains from a frozen peace. Taiwan detects dozens of Chinese ships and aircraft crossing gray zones. The patrol tests reaction times and radar saturation. Taipei responds with CAP, radio warnings, and proof exposure. The mood is tactical chess minutes from error. China summons the Philippine ambassador after Marcos's remarks about war in the Strait. Beijing calls it a provocation and threatens countermeasures. Manila cites alliances and maritime rights. The rhetoric escalates as coast guards go hull to hull. 20% US tariffs on Taiwanese products stir internal politics on the island. Export sectors push for compensation. Strategic alignment advocates say the cost is the price of security in a more hostile board. Kim Jong-un appears in a speech boasting of a world war against America. The regime shows off KN-23 and cruise missiles while hinting at solid fuel propulsion tests. The rhetoric aligns with Moscow and Beijing, seeking trade in food, diesel, and technology. The Pacific becomes the corridor of the next crisis, rotating fleets, maneuvers, flyovers, and hot radars. Each interception adds friction. Each tariff prompts retaliation. Commands train redundancy, and think tanks already map scenarios for bloc clashes. In Brazil, the institutional crisis has reached a new level. The opposition has already gathered the 41 signatures needed to open impeachment proceedings against Alexandre de Moraes. By law, this ensures his immediate removal for up to 180 days, shaking the balance of power. Senators allied with Jair Bolsonaro celebrated the move, but Senate President Davi Alcolumbre said he does not intend to put the process on the agenda. The decision sparked outrage and opened a new front of attacks against his leadership in Congress. Lawmakers from Bolsonaro's base accuse Alcolumbre of obstruction and are already working to remove him. Pressure is growing as street movements call for protests to demand the impeachment of Moraes. The US Embassy sent a warning to Moraes and his allies about possible sanctions and international isolation if the institutional clash escalates. The move is seen as a direct message from Donald Trump to the Supreme Court and the federal government. Possible sanctions include asset freezes and travel restrictions for Brazilian judges and politicians. The initiative echoes strategies used by Washington against leaders of regimes accused of democratic abuses. External pressure also targets relatives. Trump is considering sanctioning Alexandre de Moraes' wife, a symbolic move that increases embarrassment and signals the offensive will be personal and relentless. The Lula government is responding on 4 fronts: diplomatic coordination, legal actions in the Supreme Court, mobilizing its congressional base, and trying to rally popular support to counter the US offensive and the institutional crisis. Meanwhile, the economy feels the impact. Trump announced steep tariffs against Brazil, targeting 7 strategic export products. The immediate effect is higher domestic prices and loss of international competitiveness. Analysts point out that tariffs could pressure sectors such as agribusiness, steel, and manufacturing. Business leaders warn of layoffs and economic downturn if the political clash with the United States continues. Tensions between Brasilia and Washington intensify as Trump declares he will not hesitate to expand tariffs and sanctions if he deems Brazil's democracy outside acceptable standards for the United States. In Congress, opponents accuse Lula of not reacting forcefully enough, while allies call for caution to avoid a collapse in trade relations. The mood is one of deadlock and uncertainty about the next diplomatic moves. Pro- and anti-Supreme Court protests spread across Brazilian capitals. In Sao Paulo and Brasilia, demonstrators demand Moraes' removal, while groups supporting the minister accuse the opposition of coup plotting. The clash is already influencing the electoral landscape, with candidates using the crisis to gain ground. The impeachment agenda dominates debates and is likely to shape alliances for the next elections. Behind the scenes, Lula's allies try to convince Alcolumbre to reconsider his decision. Promises of positions and budget allocations emerge as bargaining chips to unblock the issue in the Senate. Despite the pressure, the atmosphere is one of total deadlock. On one side, the opposition and part of society demand Moraes' ouster. On the other, the Supreme Court and the presidency resist any move that could weaken the judiciary. Brazil is walking a razor's edge. The Brazilian crisis takes on dramatic contours as it intertwines with the international scene. The clash between the judiciary, the executive, and foreign powers creates a political minefield where each decision could have unpredictable consequences for the country and the region. As the dispute intensifies, Trump's presence on the global stage reinforces the weight of pressures on Brasilia. Sanctions, tariffs, and direct threats reshape the domestic balance, making it clear that Brazil is not immune to the waves of the New World Order. The streets boil with protests and political maneuvering, while behind the scenes, the future of the judiciary's leadership is decided. The opposition's unity and foreign backing create a sense of urgency, with every political move seeming to speed up the clock toward an explosive outcome. At the same time, global leaders watch Brazil as a strategic piece in a network of alliances and rivalries. The link between external conflicts and internal crises shows how, in the chessboard of power, no territory is isolated from international tensions. So tell me, are we in a pre-World War stage, or has World War III already started, just waiting for an apocalyptic strike? And do you think the United States should interfere in the politics of a weaker country like it's doing with Brazil? Should the judiciary fall? The debate is urgent, and every opinion deserves respect and seriousness. Thanks so much for sticking around until the end of the video. You're awesome, and I really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any updates on the raging nations. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up to help this project grow even more.